Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on in the past week. I'm Kim Da-mi in Seoul. South Korea has rejoined the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member after an 11-year absence, which will pave the way for the country to be more vocal and have more engagement in global security issues. Newly launched this week is South Korea's Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs. It's been upgraded from a sub-ministry status to a full-fledged ministry level. A huge dam in the Russian-controlled area of the southern Ukrainian city has been destroyed, with both Ukraine and Russia blaming each other. The ecological disruption unleashed a flood, making thousands evacuate and restricting access to drinking water. Starting next year, South Korea will serve as a non-permanent member at the UN Security Council for 2 years. Seoul says it will work to cooperate not only with its close allies, Washington and Tokyo, but also with Beijing and Moscow. Let's first turn to our Choi Min-jung for details.
Republic of Korea, 180.
180 votes out of a total of 192. South Korea on Tuesday earned more than two-thirds of the vote needed to become a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. The 2-year term set to begin next year marks the country's return to the Security Council after 11 years. It also marks the country's third time to take a seat on the council. President Yoon Suk-yeol touted South Korea's election win, saying that the country's entry to the UNSC is a victory of global diplomacy. Foreign Minister Park Jin also tweeted that South Korea will spare no effort in promoting freedom, peace, and prosperity across the world. In a briefing on Wednesday, the Foreign Ministry said South Korea's entry is expected to serve as an opportunity to establish itself as a global pivotal state that contributes to the peace, security, and prosperity of the international community. And among key items on the agenda is dealing with issues related to North Korea.
As we're directly involved in issues on the Korean Peninsula, we will actively contribute to making efforts to respond to North Korea's threat on nuclear development at the Security Council.
South Korea's ambassador to the UN, Hwang Jun-guk, also pledged to expand South Korea's role as a global pivotal state by tackling North Korea-related issues.
We are ready to deal with other significant regional and thematic Security Council issues, including counterterrorism and the long-standing DPRK issues, both nuclear and the human rights situation.
On top of this, South Korea plans to lead discussions on cybersecurity, women's peace and security, as well as climate. It will also establish a UNSC task force within the Foreign Ministry to better prepare itself for a successful third term. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
As we just heard from our previous report, there's a lot of anticipation over South Korea raising its voice on issues related to North Korea, now that it's become a member of the UN Security Council. Let's take a closer look at what this means for South Korea with our foreign affairs correspondent, Eunji. Welcome back, Eunji.
Thanks for having me.
So, Eunji, first off, what's the role of the UN Security Council and its member states?
Well, the UN Security Council has the primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. The 50 members make up a powerful body under the United Nations, as they can make legally binding decisions like imposing sanctions or authorizing the use of force. It's comprised of 5 permanent member states and 10 non-permanent members. South Korea and 4 other nations newly elected by the UN General Assembly this week, including Algeria, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and Slovenia, will replace Albania, Brazil, Gabon, Ghana, and the United Arab Emirates for 2 years starting January next year.
Right, as a member of the Council, South Korea will be able to better address issues regarding North Korea as well as Korean Peninsula issues, right?
That's right. Starting next year, South Korea will now be involved directly in discussions on statements and resolutions passed by the Security Council. Speaking to Arirang News, an expert said South Korea's role as a non-permanent council member is symbolic, as it shows the country's position as a legitimate world leader, and that it'll be able to also raise its voice on matters that the country has a great interest in, like human rights and nuclear proliferation.
So South Korea's membership on the council is significant insofar as it now participates directly in voting on resolutions that are binding on all member states.
With increasing threats from North Korea, South Korea, the US, and Japan have been cooperating in full swing recently. Now, there are also the members of the Council, right? Can we expect more cooperation in the near future?
Absolutely. South Korea will now be able to strengthen trilateral cooperation with the U.S., a permanent member, and Japan, a member of the Council for the 2023 to 2024 term. This is the first time since 1997 that the three countries have all taken seats on the Council together.
But Lindsay, there are still challenges to overcome in order to impose any strong measures against the regime, because Russia and China are also among the permanent members at the Council, right?
That's right. The Council cannot make a decision if there's a veto from one of the 5 permanent members, which includes, as you said, China and Russia. After South Korea was elected as a member of the Council, the country's ambassador to the UN vowed to expand cooperation with China and Russia, despite the fact that their stance on North Korea is unlikely to change. One expert explained it's unlikely that there will be any major improvements in terms of taking stronger action against North Korea, but expressed hope, saying that South Korea will be able to show that it supports anti-authoritarian regimes and take part in addressing newly emerging security issues.
Now, South Korea is at the best position to initiate and institutionalize at UN level our value originating from our successful experiences of economic growth, political development, innovative and transparent market system, and science and technology or something.
Right, lots of obstacles to overcome to actually make some reasonable voice, but still South Korea serving as a member of the Council for the first time over a decade is still meaningful on the international level that we can make our own voices, right?
Definitely. We'll have to see how South Korea can effectively cooperate with other nations to better handle North Korea's provocations.
All right, Anji, thank you for summing up this weekend.
My pleasure.
South Korea has a new national security strategy, renewed for the first time in 5 years. Under the Yoon administration, the strategy will serve as a compass for the country's policies on North Korea, diplomacy, and national defense. Global observers have taken notice of the country's rather bolder approach to securing its national and economic interests. Our Oh Soo-young reports.
South Korea is looking to become a shaper and not a follower of its geopolitical destiny for its national interest. That's according to experts on the Yoon administration's national security strategy. Naming North Korea as the country's greatest threat, Seoul put emphasis on building its 3-axis system to preemptively strike, deter, and retaliate to Pyongyang's attacks, while leaving dialogue an option.
Yoon government has a sense that the previous government of Moon Jae-in relied upon North Korea's goodwill. So it was up to North Korea how to deal with us. And that has been changed clearly. And what's been laid out this time in this document was that in order to deal with North Korea properly, first and foremost, we have to make sure that we have a capability to defend ourselves.
Seoul's strategic decisions have long been influenced by 4 major powers, the US, Japan, China, and Russia. While acknowledging that it's still highly sensitive to external conditions, South Korea has now made a clear departure from its strategic ambiguity on regional affairs, taking a more assertive and broader posture on geopolitics based on its liberal democratic values. Factoring in China's rivalry with the US, its coercive behaviour in the region, and alignment with Russia, Seoul said it would pursue mutually respectful ties while adopting what it called confident diplomacy towards its largest trade partner. China has strongly opposed Seoul's adoption of a US missile defense system on its soil and the allies' recent bolstering of trilateral relations with Japan.
Those changes were incorporated and reflected in terms of the way Yoon government is describing China's status. Important economic partner, but it's not necessarily a strategic partner. It's a country that needs to be dealt with based on clear principles. We have seen globally, not only in Washington, but in EU and elsewhere, a shift from the emphasis on decoupling to de-risking.
In fact, Seoul is seeking stronger multilateralism with other democratic middle powers for peace, stability, and future prosperity, as global challenges like climate change and technological shifts present new emerging crises and opportunities.
So cooperating with the EU on international norms, on international rules when it comes to strengthening the rules-based international order, of course, is crucial for South Korea because it ultimately strengthens Seoul's voice in this discourse.
As ever, Seoul is balancing its relations, but looks to put its national interests at the core. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Особисто ситуація надзвичайно важка. Російські війська не припиняють артилерійські удари саме по тій території, де здійснюється евакуація людей.
South Korea this week officially launched its Veterans Affairs Ministry in show of its new commitment and dedication to honoring those who fought and sacrificed themselves for the nation. The Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs has been upgraded to its previous 6 years as a sub-ministry level to full-fledged ministry status. The upgrade was among the 110 policy tasks pursued by the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Now, Bang Min-sik will lead the ministry as the first veterans minister. He said he is determined to make South Korea a place where those who have dedicated themselves to the country are respected. Also newly launched this week is a OneStop Center for Overseas Koreans. The centralized body aims to provide more support and protection for the roughly 7.5 million Koreans living abroad. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
South Korea has opened a centralized body to support overseas nationals, offering various governmental services from a single hub. On Monday, the Overseas Korean Agency was launched in the western port city of Incheon, some 30 kilometers west of Seoul, with a branch office in central Seoul opening as a walk-in center. The agency's key services include registering and issuing records on citizenship, immigration, military records and family certificates, among other civil registry proceedings, which were previously handled by separate government departments, making the bureaucratic process complicated for overseas nationals. The new agency plans to broaden the range of services to health insurance, pensions, education, visas and customs in the future. A telephone hotline was also launched the same day to provide basic consultations 24 hours a day all year round in 5 languages. By better supporting the lives of South Koreans abroad, President Yoon Suk-yeol at the opening ceremony said the agency can be a bridge for the country and its overseas nationals to grow and prosper together. Particularly from the multicultural port city of Incheon, which hosts over a dozen international organizations, the president said the agency will help South Koreans become more established in the global community. No one is to be left behind.
다문화 가정 동포, 해외 입양 동포, 또 국내 체류 동포와 같이 전담 기구의 부재로 정책의 사각지대에 놓여 있던 동포들도 적극적으로 포용될 것입니다. 강인한 도전 정신으로 어려운 여건을 극복하고 해외에 자리 잡으신 동포 여러분은 세계로 뻗어가는 대한민국의 소중한 역외 네트워크입니다.
In particular, the president mentioned the ethnic Korean victims of the 1945 atomic bomb in Hiroshima, Japan, and invited the survivors to visit South Korea, saying it's the duty of the nation to care for its people wherever they are in the world. As one of Yoon's electoral campaign promises, the agency was established under a revision to the Government Organisation Act in March. Going forward, Yoon pledged to create more educational programs and exchanges so that Koreans abroad can take pride in their identity and further elevate the country's standing as South Korea continues to rise as a champion of liberal democracy, freedom and human rights in the world. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Hopes are high over the new government agency in terms of what the body can actually offer Koreans overseas and their families. Our Lee Si-hoo has this report.
To support the more than 7.5 million South Koreans living abroad, the Overseas Koreans Agency opened its doors on Monday.
앞으로 재외동포청은 재외동포들을 보호하고 지원하는 것은 물론 재외동포와 모국 간 교류, 협력을 촉진하는 연결고리와 역할을 수행할 것입니다.
The 151-person agency, with its headquarters in Incheon and a branch office in Gwanghwamun in central Seoul, oversees policies regarding South Koreans living overseas. The office in Gwanghwamun provides administrative support in many areas of overseas Koreans' lives. This support center in Gwanghwamun provides a one-stop service for many issues that affect overseas Koreans, such as nationality, immigration, and military service. Whereas before, overseas Koreans had to visit different agencies for different services, they can now receive a comprehensive service at the office conveniently located close to many embassies.
My daughter is an American citizen, so she might apply to recover her Korean citizenship again. And being close to the US Embassy and the Foreign Ministry makes it much more convenient.
My wife is Korean, my kids as well, they were born here. So, this is helpful for us because it's easier to get things done.
The launch of the agency was one of President Yoon Suk-yeol's election pledges and later a national task. Its establishment was made possible through the revision of the Government Organization Act that specified the launch of the agency under the umbrella of the Foreign Ministry. The revision passed the National Assembly and the Cabinet in late February.
I declare the passing of the partial revision of the Government Organisation Act with 266 approvals and 6 abstentions from the 272 present.
Overseas Koreans themselves welcome the change.
Now that it's beginning, I hope that practical, not-for-show policies and administration will take place with the well-being of more than 7.5 million overseas Koreans in mind.
At the same time, they further underlined the need for better channels of communication between the home country and the Korean communities overseas.
I've been thinking it'd be nice for South Korea to refer to the voices, thoughts, and wisdom of overseas Koreans.
Meanwhile, the head of the agency, Lee Ki-cheol, vowed to listen to their many voices and offer practical help. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development lowered its growth outlook for South Korea this year, pointing to weak private investment and sluggish exports. But the international body revised its projected growth for the global economy upward. Our Moon Hae-ryun has this report.
South Korea's growth outlook for the year has been set lower than the overall global forecast, despite expectations that economic conditions will improve alongside a recovery in China. A report released by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development on Wednesday forecast global growth for the year ahead at 2.7%, and South Korea's growth rate at 1.5%. This is more than 1 percentage point lower than the country's growth seen last year at 2.6% and lower than the earlier forecast in March. The organization attributed its pessimistic outlook to high interest rates and a sluggish housing market, posing burdens on private consumption and investment. It also recommended the support of vulnerable groups here to enhance fiscal soundness in response to the country's aging population, such as training for the unemployed and improving women's participation in economic activities. As for the rest of the world, the OECD expects to see fragile growth this year, amid slowing inflation from falling energy prices and a rebound in consumer and business sentiment. The reopening of China's borders was also evaluated as having a positive impact on the global economy, with that country's predicted growth this year set at 5.4%. However, the Eurozone was predicted to grow at 0.9%, hindered by the ongoing war in Ukraine and high energy prices, Russia being one of only 2 OECD countries expected to experience a decline rather than growth for the year ahead. On the same day, the World Bank raised its global growth forecast from 1.7% to 2.1%. The bank also cut its global growth prediction for 2024 to 2.4% from the 2.7% made in January, citing the ongoing effects of monetary policy, which has seen business investment reduced. It also raised concerns over the possibility of a further economic slowdown caused by stress in the banking sector. By region, the World Bank shared similar views with the OECD in that China was predicted to show rapid growth this year, unlike the Eurozone. Meanwhile, on the back of the revised outlook, US stocks closed higher on Tuesday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.03%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq gained 0.36%. 문혜련, Arirang News.
South Korea lost to Italy at the FIFA U20 World Cup semi-finals. But there's still something to play for. The young Taeguk Warriors will face Israel next Monday for third place. Our Choi Soo-hyung has more.
It was an intense match. South Korea took on Italy for a place in the U20 World Cup final on Friday 6 a.m. Korea time. The Korea Football Association hosted the cheering event at Gwanghwamun Square with the Seoul government and the official supporters of the U20 national football team, the Red Devils. And despite the early hours, the love and enthusiasm of South Korean football fans for their team. Even though the semi-final kicked off at such an early time, fans didn't hesitate to show up to cheer South Korea's U20 team at the square. The U20 World Cup is held every 2 years, but it was cancelled in 2021 due to COVID-19. The square was filled with excitement for South Korea's second consecutive U20 World Cup semi-final and a dream that they could do better than in 2019 when they lost in the final.
I think we struggled during the first half, but it seems like we'll come back in the second half and win 2-0. I hope we can make history by achieving the first ever World Cup victory for South Korea.
I'm really excited to be here in Seoul. I think the energy in the crowd is really great, and this seems like a really fun way to celebrate soccer, the U20 World Cup.
Italy, boasting their strongest squad, opened the scoring in the first half, but South Korea were all square 9 minutes later thanks to a penalty kick scored by Lee Seung-won. The goal brought fans from their seats, shouting loudly and shaking the square with their celebration. Tension, however, rose as the game went on, Italy having much of the possession. Then, with only 4 minutes remaining, Korean hearts were broken when the Italians took the lead and ultimately won the game 2-1. After the match, most of the fans tried to cheer the young Taeguk Warriors to give them a boost.
It was impressive to see our players. I was so proud and the support from the fans were fervent. Though it is disappointing, there's still the 3rd, 4th place playoff, so I hope they gather their strength again.
Officials said as over 1,000 people gathered, the facilities were well equipped to ensure safety. Although South Korea lost the game, there is no doubt they'll be hopeful for new opportunities that lies ahead of them. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
That is all we have for this edition of Weekly News Highlights. Stay safe wherever you are. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.